The applique tutorial PDF is up, though. I believe this was made by Lady Armstrong. So it's an excellent tutorial. It does not have the no fray. That's something I discovered when I was reading all about applique by something. I read it. It was good. So it's up there on the after class discussion if you want that. Looks like we have 4 minutes left.
Hello, can people hear me?
Yeah, you're a little quiet.
Okay, how about now?
That's better.
Great.
You all set to teach?
I mean, as ready as I'll ever be.
Wait. So right when I begin the recording, I'm going to hop to the um thingy-majiggy, the PowerPoint I have, so that the recording has an easy access point to see what class it is, and then hand it off to you.
Okay. And I have a PowerPoint presentation. I don't think we'll have visuals on me because I don't have a webcam. Whoops.
Okay. If you have a PowerPoint presentation, then you can just start with that, and I don't have to show mine. It's just so that the video can be like, this is roleplay in Belegarth class,
Yeah.
in case I mess up on any other recording things.
It's all good.
So we got like a couple minutes left.
Okay, no worries. Hmm.
And then if you have a PayPal or Venmo or something you wanted Lynn to put in the Twitch, you can throw that in the chat right now.
Nah, I don't. It's cool. But thank
Okay.
you.
Yep.
I would
And
say, like, if there's any way to give back to the event, that's what I would put back.
okay. So Lynn, if you just want to display the Chaos Wars shop and links for Quinn's class, that'd be great. And then it is noon, so I'm going to do a little spiel announcing your class, and then you can take it away
Hooray.
after I begin the recording.
Okay.
This is the past, present, and roleplay of Belegarth with Quinn today. This class will go until 1 o'clock. If it goes long, you can join us in the after class Discord channel on the Chaos server or find her on Facebook, and I'm sure she'd be happy to answer your questions there. Go ahead and take it away.
Hooray. Hi, everybody. This is Quinn. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, no, it says screen sharing is disabled.
I can fix that.
Thank you. Because I have a PowerPoint.
Yeah. We fixed that at the beginning yesterday and we forgot to do that. All right, you should be good.
Okay. Share. Hooray. Can people see the first slide of the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Sure can.
Hooray. Okay. Well, first, there are a couple of things that I want to say right at the start. Of course, I want to thank our lovely organizers and everybody who's worked really hard to put this together. I know it's certainly a bummer to miss out on one of the biggest events of the season, at least in person, but I really appreciate the work that everybody's doing to bring the community together, even in these difficult and strange times. The next thing I want to say is that just to be clear, this entire presentation is basically one person's opinion. I don't profess to say that, oh, my way is the right way, or that if you don't do it my way, you're wrong. That's not it at all. But I'm hoping that um, my experiences and my opinions can help guide some folks who maybe have questions about what role-playing Belegarth looks like. And then the other thing that I'll say is that if anybody has any questions throughout, please, feel free to stop me. Feel free to jump on in and ask those questions. I would like this presentation to be as interactive as possible. So, just as a bit of context, normally I do these as panel discussions, or I do them, where a lot of different folks are speaking and talking about their experiences in RP. Because of the circumstances, that wasn't really possible this time around. But again, if folks have questions throughout, please feel free to jump on in. Okay, great. So, beyond that, first thing any great presentation needs, of course, is an agenda. These are the things that I'm hoping to discuss over the course of this presentation. So I'll do a little bit more of an in-depth introduction. I'm going to want to define role play so we can kind of all get on the same page. Talk about ways of creating and portraying your character. Um, we're going to talk about aesthetics or look. We're going to talk about lore because I think that is an important corollary or a thing that folks who enjoy RP may also enjoy. I'm also going to talk about one of my personal areas of expertise, which is Monsterdom, which is perhaps one of the most visible forms of role play in Belegarth. I'm going to talk about racial titles in the context of Monsterdom, just because I think it's a fun thing to add in. We'll talk about the state of RP in Belegarth, although, of course, that slide's going to be very different given the context of the last 3 to 6 months. And then there'll certainly be some time for questions. So, with that, let's go ahead and dive right in. So, first, an introduction. Who am I? Well, my title is Fengoma Gnarlhyde, aka Quinn the Knoll. For anybody who's wondering, Fengoma is a title for gnolls. It basically means that I've gone through some trials, some tests to become a lore keeper for that monster race. I started in Bell about 6 years ago, give or take, and I have been offering classes like this for the last 4-ish years. So pretty steeped in monster culture, pretty steeped in RP. It's definitely a place I get a lot of enjoyment. So hopefully, again, what I can share will be useful to you. Um, I have to admit, because I'm sharing my screen, I can't really see chat. But if there's something folks really want to learn from this class, again, I encourage folks to ask questions as I run through the presentation. So, with that said, I kind of want to jump into just the baseline, get everybody on the same page. So, you might be wondering, what is RP or role play? Well, first, I'll offer you a general definition. So, this is to act out or perform the part of a person or character. Obviously, this has a wide variety of uses. You may have heard the term MMORPG, like massively multiplayer online role playing game, or sometimes it's used in psychotherapy, where one person takes on the role of a potential client, or they pretend to be someone. In Belegarth, I think we can get a little bit more specific with our definition. So I would say it is to take on a persona that is different than your mundane self. So this could be, oh, I'm going to be a monster. I'm going to be a holy paladin of Ishtar. I'm going to be X, Y, and Z. Basically, anything that's different from your day to day life, I would consider to be role play. And one of the great things about role play, which I'm not really going to discuss over the course of this class, but basically one of the great things about it is that there's many different levels to role play. If you just want to show up with, a little bit of garb and a different name from your mundane name for when you fight, that's great. If you want to go full tilt, full kit, paint up the works, get a racial title, blah blah blah, that's great too. There's no right or wrong way to have fun with RP. The other thing that I want to point out is that unlike other LARPs or war games, RP has no in-game mechanics in Belegarth. So for folks who maybe cross-game or try other LARPs, there are classes in Amtgard, like I believe Wizard, Monk, Barbarian, that offer certain in-game benefits during class battles, but that doesn't really apply in Belegarth. It's just anything you do is for your own enjoyment and entertainment. Same thing with Strains and Dystopia Rising. They may offer certain perks or benefits. Um, but yeah, not in Belegarth. So next bullet point, why role play? Um, I could have probably dedicated a whole slide or even a whole presentation to this, but the reason why I kept it as a small bullet point was because I think it really varies from person to person. And, everybody has their own reason to RP. Um, I think probably the best way for me to address this is just to talk a little bit about my own personal experience. So when I joined Belegarth in 2014, I was just I was doing it for the fun, doing it for the exercise, but as I got a little bit more into it, I saw that there were, many different ways to play, many different ways to role play, and I was really interested in monster culture. It seemed like there was a lot of lore, a lot of history there, and it seemed like there was a place where I could, you know, do a little bit of writing. I could sort of put my own mark on it, and it's just for me, it's a great escape. I can work a 9 to 5 job. I can, live my mundane life, but then on the weekends or for Belegarth, I can be somebody totally different from who I am in Bell. So yeah, that's a little bit about why IRP. I'm sure everybody's going to come up with their own answer in with that regard, but I mean, ultimately, I think the why. I think it can be important, but as long as you're having fun, then you're all good. The other thing that I want to point out because I think it may come up, is that I'm likely to use the term race throughout the course of this presentation, and I want this to serve as a shorthand for fantasy race or monster race, not the race we may experience in the mundane world. So just as a heads up there. Okay. So the next big question that folks may have is, okay, I don't have a character, but I'd like to get started. What are some things or some considerations that I should take into account if I'm going to create my own character? Well, the first thing that I would ask folks to consider would be the setting of Belegarth. So I'm going to read a quote that comes straight from the Belegarth website. It says Belegarth Medieval Combat Society, or Belegarth for short, is a live action battle game organization devoted to simulating Dark Age and medieval combat. Participants may focus on history, but also are free to include elements of fantasy, such as those from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Now, I added a little bit of emphasis there, saying focusing on simulating Dark Age and medieval combat, focus on history, and elements of fantasy. And the reason why I bring those up is because I think those are things to really consider for your baseline when creating a character. Um, like I said, I don't know that there, or I don't think that there's a wrong way to RP, but this is a shared setting that in a game that we create together. And so if folks work together to work within that setting, I think the experiences will be more fun, more memorable, and more immersive for everybody. Beyond that, I would say the only limit is your imagination. I've seen and I've heard of monster races of all stripes and varieties. I've heard of folks basically saying, "Oh, I'm a dwarf, I'm an elf, I'm a drow, I'm a dragon, I'm a goblin, I'm a gnoll, I'm a anything that your heart desires, you could probably be." And as an added bonus, there's likely at least one or two other people who also role play that thing and that you can, kind of have a chat with. So yeah, those are the only main considerations that I would say for creating your character. Now, as far as portraying your character, so there's a lot of ways that folks can potentially get into character. I think physical appearance is going to be one of the first things that others see, but that's not where it ends. There's other things to consider. So think about your voice, your posture, the company you keep, and how you may greet or interact with others. There's lots of different ways that you may move around an event, a lot of ways that you may interact with people that can really add to your characterization. Another really important point as far as aesthetic or appearance is concerned is that accessories and layers can go a long way to making your character feel more lived in. So I'm sure you can all imagine a person in Belagarth. Maybe you have a friend, maybe this is you, where they wear a tabard and hakama pants and maybe like an Under Armour shirt. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think that's well within the rules for our minimum garb standards, so no worries there. But if that person wanted to role play to sell that character, they basically have two pieces to work with. So that better be a pretty amazing tabard and a pretty amazing pair of Hakama pants. Now, by contrast, if you've got layers and accessories, and especially if those layers and accessories tell a story about, like, oh, this cloak is thick, but it's weathered because my character lives in colder climates, and I've got this staff because my character has a limp, and I've got this war paint because my character is a part of a militaristic society. Like, basically there's many more things that you can do to make your character feel lived in, and of course the same goes with those other things I talked about as far as getting into character. The other thing that may really help you get into character would be to consider the why. So, for example, if your character is a scavenger, how might that affect their appearance? Like they may not have a single complete garb set, let alone one that's made of fancy materials. If your character is a paladin, because I know that's a very common and sought after archetype in a lot of other forms of fantasy, you may ask, okay, does your character have some kind of holy symbol? Do they have it on their tabard? Do they have it on their shield? Do they, you know, characterize it in some other way? If your character is a monster character, might they interact differently with a monster of the same race versus a human versus monster of a different race? I mean, and of course, we always want to keep it fun. We want to keep it friendly to a certain extent. But these are things to consider when you want to portray your character, because again, that'll make your character feel more real, feel more lived in the world of Belegarth. Okay, so next, we've got aesthetics and signifiers. So, aesthetics might be the look of your character. Are you neat and clean? Are you like a high class paladin? Or are you grimy and disheveled, like a goblin who likes to play in mud and laugh as they stab people in the knees? Um, Another thing to consider is, do you wear armor? Um, my personal experience has been that armor can take a good kit and make it great, and it can take a great kit and make it excellent. Um, Obviously, this is more applicable to you know people who are combatants, people who are on the field, but I think it adds to the look for sure. Um, I know certain races are known for wearing certain types of garbs or colors, and because many monster races have what we would consider to be inhuman features, wearing a mask, whether it be a full face mask or a murder mask, can go a long way into selling the appearance of your character. Another thing that I really strongly encourage for anybody looking to role play a specific fantasy race or group would be for them to have signifiers. And so basically, a signifier is something your race is known for doing or wearing. So for gnolls are known for wearing collars, and the bigger the collar, the more sort of important or powerful the gnoll. They're known for their war paint, and specifically, every clan has a sort of war paint that they wear. Uh, um, Often, gnolls will have a stripe of fur along the spine. That's not required, but it is encouraged. And same thing with armor and fur in other places. Now, of course, this also needs to take into consideration the climate. Obviously, we don't want people to be wearing oodles and oodles of fur if they're going to sweat themselves into a heat stroke. But you know, there's a lot of different ways to approach those, sort of individual signifiers while still letting people know, hey, this person is a gnoll. Beyond that, this is my personal opinion, but I think signifiers are critical for establishing a race in Belegarth because it serves a number of purposes. So there's branding. Like I bet if I asked pretty much anybody in Belegarth, okay, what are the signifiers for goblin? I feel like pretty much everybody would be able to tell me they paint up green and they cover their knees and elbows. And so if everybody knows that, not only does it make those goblins that portray that easier to identify, but it also means that if a new person comes to practice or a new person comes to an event, they see a goblin and they think, wow, I really want to do that. They just need to ask pretty much anybody and say, hey, how do I get into this? And they can say, oh, you paint green and you put on your elbows and knee pads, or you cover your knees and elbows. Um, so yeah, that's why I think signifiers are really important. Some people will take it even farther and say like, oh, you want to pass the 5 foot rule or the 10 foot rule, where if somebody is 5 or 10 feet away from you, they're going to be able to tell what you are. I mean, since we are a combat based sport, we're not a movie production. I think that's maybe not always the most realistic to expect, but you know, it's certainly a goal to shoot for or an ideal. And I will say that there are certain European LARPs that just look fantastic. So if you ever need some garb inspiration or if you need some RP inspiration, there's definitely some places that I can point you to. I have to admit, I don't remember what they're called off the top of my head, but yeah, there's definitely some great garb out there in that realm. Okay, so this next slide, I've been going on and on about signifiers. I've been going on and on about aesthetics, and I figured I wanted to insert a few slides that just provide some pictures of what I'm talking about. So, um, I hope folks can see my mouse, but here I'm circling around, the murder mask and the sort of leather crown. I think really helps sell the look. Here you can see the collar. I actually wear a gorget just because, again, bigger collar equals more important knoll. And you'll notice the layers. So if I was wearing just this top, I feel like that'd be a lot harder to sell. Whereas I've got the top as well as the mantle, as well as, some of the accessories. So I think that really helps uh, comes together to make the look that much more striking. Here's another one. Again, same murder mask. Here, we've got the posture. We've got, again, some of those, belt flags. I think I was wearing war braids at the time. And then here's another great example about how armor can go a long way in improving a kit. And then here is some war paint. All right. So this is a less combat focused picture, but you can see some accessories. I've got my my holy bone. I've got my war paint. This is my secret box for secret null ceremonies. Um, again, it's just the more layers you add, the more you can sell your aesthetic. Um, and then here's my girlfriend Screech being a cutie. Hee hee. And then last but not least, here's my most favorite mask. And I think this really sells the look, and the jaw actually articulates. So that's fun stuff. So, like I said, you can get in as crazy with it and as deep with it as you want. It just depends on what works for you and what direction you want to go with your character. Okay, so with all that out of the way, I want to pivot a little bit and talk about lore. So, when I say lore, what I mean is basically the stories that we tell to build up ourselves, build up our world, and build up sort of the setting of Belegarth. And I think there are three broad categories of lore that folks may be interested in. There is lore you write about yourself. So in my case, this might be lore of Quinn or the lore of Gnarlhyde and how she became a Fengoma. There's also group lore. So this might be lore that's written about a realm, that's written about a unit. And then, of course, there's racial lore. So this is lore that's written about a race, and it often includes a racial origin story. And I will note that more and more races, and specifically monster races, are working towards a unified origin story and a shared universe. So one of the most popular origin stories is that all of the gods of Belegarth got together and thought, okay, we're we're tired of war. We're going to take a break. They're killing all of our squishies. Nobody's going to worship us if everybody's dead. So let's all cast stones, and wherever their stone lands, wherever a god stone lands, that's where their people will have dominion over. And I've seen a lot of variations on that story. I've seen some very creative takes, and so by having that shared origin story, we can, play off of each other's lore, and we can help further build and enrich the world of Belegarth. The other thing to consider is that lore often goes hand in hand with RP because there are often reasons in lore for why a particular person or race may do something. So earlier I mentioned that one of the signifiers for the knoll is that they wear a collar, and that the thicker the collar, the more important the knoll. And basically, the reason for that is that, among other things, gnolls can be very cannibalistic in nature. And by protecting your neck, one of your most vulnerable, spots in the body, you can, keep yourself safe from the attack of others. And you can also say like, oh, I found this leather, I found this, big beefy hide. Clearly, I was able to hunt something that was, worthy of being taken down, and so respect me. Um, so yeah, and again, these things are kind of like a big stew. They all inform one another, and it's great to be a part of. It's a very deep rabbit hole to fall down if you so choose. And certainly, I'm more than happy to talk about lore more once we get to the FAQ. But I think with that said, I want to pivot one more time and talk about a specific subsection of RP and talk about Monsterdom, because I think this is really my area of expertise, and I think maybe it's perhaps what some of you who've come to this presentation to learn about. So Monsterdom's past, I would say that Monsterdom has a long storied history in Belegarth. Monsters have been around for more or less as long as Belegarth has been around, maybe longer, as long as Dag has been around. I have to admit, I wasn't there when it all started, obviously. So my anything that I can share with you is secondhand or third-hand information, but I'll do my best to paint a picture for you. So back in the days of yore, when Bell and Dag were but the same sport, many folks were focused on knights and knighthood, and they really wanted to focus on Western European chivalry. And so many of the original monsters saw that and thought, nah, dog, I want to do my own thing. And so they found new ways to play. And so and one of the most sort of famous monster games would be to say, oh, we want to do an honor duel. And they set up, they post up against this person that they're honor dueling, quote unquote. And then three of their buddies run up behind them and whack them. Uh, so basically, it was just a fun and playful way of saying, hey, chivalry doesn't have to be, or knighthood and chivalry doesn't have to be the only way to play and get involved in this game. I also want to give a shout out to orcs. Basically, as far as I know, and there are folks who may dispute this, but my understanding is that orcs were actually the first monster race to be portrayed in Belegarth, and that goblins were among the earliest monster races and remain some of the most popular today. So even though we started with orcs, we now have dozens of just different monster races that folks may portray. And of course, over time, many races have sprung up, and virtually every race has their own idiosyncrasies, lore, and leaders. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about Monsterdom's present, or maybe I should say Monsterdom's recent past, given the state of the world. Um, in my opinion, Monsterdoms and monsters fit into three broad categories. So there are what we would call the barbaric monsters. So these are things that maybe would fit right in a J.R.R. Tolkien novel and an R.A. Salvatore novel, things like orcs, goblins, kobolds, and gnolls, etc. There's also gothic monsters. So these are things that maybe seem like they would come out of like a Mary Shelley novel. So vampires, werewolves, zombies, and the undead, things of that vein. And then finally, there are fae and fairy folk, and these obviously can come from folklore, but also many other writings from around the world. And these might be spirits, wraiths, fairies, etc. Now, I may be a little biased because of the circles that I run with and the folks that I most often see when I'm playing Belegarth. But in my experience, some of the most common monster races fall into that barbaric category. But there is, like I said, there's many ways to RP. There's many ways to get into it. No, there's if one of the gothic monsters calls to you, or one of the fae folk calls to you, absolutely go with your heart and chase your bliss and do what makes you happy. But in my experience, some of the most popular monster races are listed here, and I'll just take a second and talk about some of their identifiers in case anybody is interested in looking up any of these races. So goblins, as I mentioned, paint green and cover their knees and elbows. Kobolds paint orange. They wear rainbow colors. They call themselves the Rainbow of Spite. And they often keep their dominant arm uncovered as sort of a tribute of respect to one of their kobold heroes. Lizard men paint, I believe, red, green, blue, white, or black. And their signifiers are a mantle and gosh, what's the word for it? Like a front flap. like a gosh, I'm totally blanking on the word and I feel like a dummy, but kind of like a caveman flap. Gnolls, the main signifier with collar, but there's also war paint, there's fur, there's the strip of fur down the spine is perhaps the most common spot. Some folks wear tails, not required. And then murder masks or masks in general go a long way in helping to characterize. Hobgoblins paint blue, and they wear, I believe it's called a skullcap, I might be saying that wrong. My apologies. But basically, it is a like a metal or what's the word for it? A ring mail kind of caveman flap. God, I feel like such a silly person for not knowing that term, but it'll probably come to me. And I believe they also wear uh, leg armor because their leg bones are supposed to be very sharp. Um, Orcs typically paint green, and typically they paint darker green. Um, they also typically have war paint, and they have the symbol of the Wog. If you've ever seen, like in Warhammer 40K, that big gnarly looking smiley face, that's the symbol that many orcs will use. And I don't know if this is 100% true, but one of the ways that I've heard people explain the difference between orcs and goblins is that if you put out your thumb, like if an orc and a goblin are standing next to each other and you put out your thumb, whichever one looks like more like a thumb is the orc. um, let's see. There's also ogres. Ogres, their main symbol signifier is that they are sleeveless or they don't wear sleeves, and they also do war paint or face paint. Skavens are like rat folk, and their main signifiers are they wear a mantle, they wrap their hands, and some of them wear tails. Hatchels wear hats, um, and I believe they typically paint purple. There's also bugbears. So that's another really common fantasy race that you'll find in many adventures in like D&D, for example, or Dungeons and Dragons. They typically cover their dominant arm with a like a war sleeve because it's said to be touched by Marjack, and they don't want to show that to just anybody. Tengu bird people. So these folks will often have feathers. Sometimes they'll have a beak of some kind. The most prominent Tengu that I'm aware of right now in the sport is Cyrano. He paints himself blue. I honestly, I think Tengu can come in a lot of different colors, but I say all of this to say that there are a lot of different ways to roleplay, a lot of different monster races, and each of these races has their own sort of flavor and lore and personality. So if this is something that sounds like it's of interest to you, I would absolutely recommend reaching out to folks who are members of that race or going to some of the other places that I'm going to talk about at the end of this presentation so you can learn more and really dive as deep as you want to dive. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about Monsterdom's future. I would say that Monsterdom started with an ethos of rebellion, basically saying, hey, we want to play in our own way. And I would say that it retains it to this day. So new races are regularly created, new lore is pretty consistently being written, and new life is being added to existing races. So there's definitely a lot of room for folks to leave their mark, as it were. So yeah, I did promise I'd talk about this, so I'm just gonna slide it in here. But many monster races have titles for outstanding members. So, for goblins, there's the Kadeen and the Witch Doctor, which is for combat and lore respectively. For gnolls, there's the Krish and the Fengoma, which is for combat and lore respectively. Ogres have Shaman, Deep Ones have Esoteres, and Bugbears have Hidewalkers. So basically, I think most races have ways to recognize people who are doing a really amazing job. And sometimes these even include specific trials that an individual can go through to really cement that. So, yeah, a lot of fun there. Just another way to play, another way to get involved if folks are interested. Hmm, excuse me. So, one of my last slides before I wrap up is the future of RP in Belegarth. So, a friend of mine described 2020 as a time skip for Belegarth, just because so many events are being canceled, so many folks are quarantining and staying home. So if that's where you're at, now might be a great time to work on taking your garb to the next level. There's definitely a lot of things to consider, like layers, what colors you use and how you integrate them. Um, what accessories you're looking at. I know that there have been a lot of, or at least a handful of competitions about, like I think I forget the name of it, but like Nifty and Thrifty, where there's a challenge to try and put together a set of garb for like $25 or less. I mean, there's a lot that you can do with just a trip to the thrift store. some time and some YouTube tutorials about, distressing fabric or distressing garb. So definitely something to look into. You can certainly write lore for yourself, your unit, your realm, or your race. Um, I don't have it as a bullet point on here, but I probably should. I know a lot of my friends are, taking up other hobbies within the context of Belegarth. Um, so a lot of my friends have been working on their leatherworking skills, which can go a long way to making some of those armors and murder masks and things that I mentioned earlier on in the presentation. There are folks that are, channeling their energy and creativity into other related hobbies. Like I know I personally have been playing a lot of tabletop role playing games to try and get my RPG and role playing fix. This is a great time, like I said, to start writing. Um, a great time to write some music, or whatever it is that you want to do, wherever your creativity takes you. The other thing that I really want to point out is that this is a hobby and it's meant to be fun. So I think I've said it before, I'll say it again. We're nerds in the woods with sticks. We need to chase our bliss and do what works for us. And it's okay to have fun in your own ways. The other thing that I'll say, especially again, given the state of the world, is that it is absolutely okay to take breaks and it's okay or even recommended to practice self care. Um, so, yeah, with that being said, there are a few places that I'd recommend for folks who want to learn more. One, of course, is to talk to folks or members of the race that you're interested in. So, certainly you can feel free to reach out to me directly about Knowles. I'll be more than happy to point you in the direction of other folks for other races if that's what you're interested in. We actually have a Belegarth specific website. It's called geddon.org. If you go to geddon.org and you type in monster or you type in the race that you're interested in, chances are there's already a page there that's going to talk about some of the basics or maybe even some of the complexities and deep dive of that race. I know also, not everybody has a Facebook, but there is a Creatures of Bell DAG page on Facebook, which is where a lot of people who are P and Bell congregate, and that's another great way to connect to folks and to, reach out to people who maybe are doing something that you would like to do yourself, and figure out how to get where you need to go. So, with that being said, that's pretty much everything that I have prepared. There's other things that I could kind of blather on about, but does anybody have any questions, any comments, anything that they want to ask while we are gathered here today?
I did post the link for the Thrifty Nifty Garb Challenge in the chat. I was also going to ask about how you feel or how other people feel about making like large species lore. So I'm a Fae and we don't really have any like collective lore right now, but I really want to work on encouraging pinky races to make lore together or separately. So I'm kind of just looking at taking over the Fae lore at this point until I can get other people involved. And I was wondering how you go about like building a lore, I guess, for a species.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And thank you for asking. So I think there are a couple of different questions that are layered in there that I'd like to answer. So the first thing to consider when you want to write lore for a species is what has already been done or is there a foundation to work off of? So I know when I started working on Knoll lore for Belegarth, pretty much everything that we had that was official was admittedly ripped straight from Dungeons and Dragons. And I looked at that and I thought to myself, that's great, but we are creative enough as a group to be able to come up with our own thing. And so I basically just set about writing new lore for the species. And, like I said earlier, I did my best to tie it in or integrate it with other monster races just to really sort of tie it into the world of Belegarth. But I just sat down and wrote it. And I think that's definitely something to consider is just if nobody is working in the space that you want to work in, just do it. Just sit down and do it, right? Now, I think things get a little bit more complicated if you are writing in a space where there already is an established canon or an established lore. So, for example, goblins have 20 plus years of lore and history, and a whole bunch of other stuff that's all on the wiki. So if somebody came in and said, I really want to write goblin lore, what I would encourage them to do is read the lore that's already out there and figure out ways and stories that you can tell that fit within that ethos, but that don't necessarily rewrite the whole canon, because then there are going to be folks who are like giving you some serious side eye, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a group activity. This is a group sport. There are a lot of people who put their time and their energy, their blood, sweat, and tears into writing lore, among other things. And so it can be seen as really like a tough spot to be in when somebody comes in and says, I'm going to rewrite everything. Now, the other question, I think, is how do we get other people to, engage in RP and engage in lore writing? I think that's a more difficult question to answer. Basically, I would say that everybody has their own reason for RPing. Everybody has their own reason to write lore. And for some folks, it's just not going to be a part of the sport that clicks with them. But I will say that it is really fun to have other people to RP with, other people to kind of bounce off of as far as roleplay is concerned. In a way, it's almost like, improv and a shared story and mythos that you can create together in the moment. So the best advice that I have there would be to, just have fun with it, because I feel like if you're having fun, if you're, connecting with others, if you're having a great time, other people are going to see that, they're going to resonate with that, and it's going to draw people in. So, I mean, you're not going to grab everybody, but, certainly by projecting that positive image and by having a great time, that's going to draw more people in my experience. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Do we have any other questions, perhaps in the Twitch chat or on the Zoom?
I just wanted to say that I did put a link to the how to create a new race article from Gedden into the chat here in case anyone's interested. So in my view, that article is incomplete. However, it's a good jumping off point, at least. Mm-hmm. And my other point to also add to that answer to that question would be, when I started writing for the elementals, there was basically nothing. There was a page that had some info about, the general idea of what elementals were, that had been written by Thumbs, which is great, and it was a good place to start from. But there's like, I don't know, like 15 of us total in the whole game, and like 5 of us are actually active. So I was like, there's not specific pages for each kind of elemental. There's no information on what makes each elemental type different from one another, what makes elementals different from other kinds of things. And I think one of the really important things that I thought of when I was going through it and writing was, how do these things relate to other things? And one of the really cool things that I thought was an awesome thing that Thumbs wrote was, in his original pitch for his idea of elementals, he wrote that, like, because elementals are not like your classic original 9 monster race type of race, they're not a barbaric monster, they're something else, but they're also not mortal, and they're not Pinky. They're like otherworldly in a way. You know, a lot of the whole thing between Monsterdom and Pinkydom is that antagonistic relationship, but elementals don't really have that because, like, they don't have, like, a hatred for Pinkies or anything. They just don't understand them. They get along probably better with other monstrous races just because they're, like, their idea of death as impermanent, because elementals never die. They just, like, basically, like, you can destroy an elemental temporarily, its form, but it will always reform. So, like, monsters being, you know, really flippant about killing things doesn't really bother elementals because they don't understand really the concept of death very much. So I think that was a cool thing that kind of set us apart and made us different. And I think, you know, when I helped to write the How to Create a Race article, one of the things that I put in there is really, like, one of the biggest problems that I found when I was reading through all of the lore of all of the races before I wrote the article is that there's a lot of races that have no interaction built in with other races. So, like, for one, the Nadar, they're like a subset of plant elementals. Basically, they're very, very similar to a plant elemental, but not. They're like a subset thing. They're their own thing. But very similar. They don't have any lore that connects them in any way to anybody else in the game. They don't have antagonizing history. They don't have allies. They don't have anything like that. And that's fine, but that makes it really hard to roleplay outside of your own group. So that would be my only like real advice if you're going to, like, take over writing everything for the Fae, would be to pay special attention to how different groups relate to one another and how the lore interacts. Ogres are weirdly an elementally powered race in Belegarth. It's totally weird, and I had no idea of this until I started reading through ogre lore when I was reading everybody's lore. And now I'm having to deal with the ogres and trying to, like, figure out with them back and forth, like, how do we make that work? Because in their lore, which existed long before elemental lore, they say that they are, you know, elementally, like, their souls are part elemental. Well, how does that work with actual elementals in the game? How do we relate to them? So we're still trying to figure that out. So just keeping those things in mind, I guess. Sorry, that was kind of a tangent.
No, it's all good. I think there's a lot of really great points that you brought up in there. So this idea that, you know, let's see, the idea that races may have sub-races. So, you know, like in the context of elementals, right? Fire, water, air, earth. There's so many different ways for people to expand out their creativity. And within the other monster races, there are, or even within other RP races, there are a lot of, you know, divergence. And this is a way for folks to express their own creativity without, you know, necessarily having to create something entirely new out of whole cloth. Because, you know, I know that that can certainly be intimidating to be like, oh my God, I don't know if I have a vision to create an entire race, but if I can fit into this subcategory and put my own little spin on it, that's a whole other can of worms. So I think that's great. I also really agree with the idea of creating a shared lore or a shared experience and really considering how your race may interact with others, because again, that just gives us more to bounce off of each other with. It gives us a more beautifully interconnected world. So yeah, I mean, a lot of great points there. I think the one thing that I'd really hammer home is that at the end of the day, if nobody's doing it and you want to see it done, just do it. You know, I mean, I think that's, if I think back to, again, like nobody told me to rewrite the Knoll lore, but I'm like, we don't need D&D lore. We can have our own lore. So if nobody's doing it, you can be that person, and I encourage you to do so.
I feel the same way. That's kind of what I did with Elementals. Is there was Thumbs' basic, Elemental page, but there was so much more room. And now, like, there's a Facebook group for Elementals, and we know who the Elementals in the game are, and we know, when we're gonna get together, and it's like, it's more organized now, and I gave people the opportunity to be like, okay, I wrote a page for, water elementals, all the water elementals, I need you to go read this and tell me what, if anything, needs to change. What you want to add, what you want to remove, what you want to tweak, just so that there's something out there so people know it's an option. And I think it's more important to do the thing and put it out there and maybe make mistakes or, have to have things that need adjustment than not put it out there at all and not have people know things are an option or, how one thing relates to another. I am fascinated by this Fae concept. I want to hear all about it. I think it sounds super rad. And that Fae court thing that you were talking about, I want to know all the things. So yeah, I definitely say go for it, and if you need help, let me know, or advice or whatever, because like I said, I've written a lot of lore at this point, but I am fascinated by what you're trying to do, especially the activities that you're talking about. Like, that is not something I had considered as far as lore activities. So yeah, let's do those things.
Yeah, let's chat. Maybe not here, but we'll keep chatting because I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, that sounds dope. Not gonna lie, that sounds awesome.
And actually, that brings up a couple of other really interesting points while I'm thinking of it. One is that you mentioned that there is an Elemental Facebook group, which is excellent. And I will say that many other monster races have similar Facebook groups. So I know earlier I mentioned the Creatures of Beldag Facebook page. And so if you just go on there and say, hey, I'm interested in X race, generally speaking, somebody will pop on there and say, hey, let me invite you to our specific page so you can ask questions. Another thing that I really love is seeing people take their race and doing things with it. So, wow, that's really vague. Let me be more specific. So having racially specific ceremonies, especially things that the community can participate in. So one thing that the Gnolls do is after a Gnoll has been a Gnoll for approximately a year, we hold a little ceremony for them and present them with either a Gnoll collar, perhaps a fancier one that they have, or we give them tokens, we give them little presents, kind of like as a way to say, hey, you've made it a year, we're really glad we have you here, thanks for sticking around. And we feel like it's in character anyway for something that, a Gnoll clan might do to a Gnoll that's kind of coming of age. So that's basically, there's lots of opportunity for ceremony, there's lots of opportunity for getting the entire community involved. I think a lot of the times, in my experience, the monster community can be a little bit insular as far as its ceremonies are concerned. So I know a lot of the sort of lore keeper ceremonies don't necessarily get advertised in the same way as, like night trials or nightings or whatever. But if there are activities that the community can participate in, I absolutely encourage that, because I think that's another way to bring people into the realm of roleplay, even if they don't ultimately decide that they want to be a monster. They don't ultimately decide that they're gonna role play to the same extent or whatever the case may be. So yeah, absolutely. I love hearing people doing ceremonies and bringing the community together in that way.
Another really cool thing to look into if you're like not necessarily interested in being in a like species lore, or you have your own thing going on, or like if you're a death related character is the death cult. I believe they have a Geddon page, and their lore is just spot on, and they do really cool stuff at events. So if people are interested in that death aspect of their character, check it out.
Is there a page for that? I would love to know where the page for that is. I have not seen that one yet.
I believe there's a Facebook page for it. I also haven't seen a Geddon page for it, but to be honest, I haven't explicitly sought it out. But if there is one, that's definitely worth looking into.
Yeah, that would be dope, because I know several death elementals who would be very interested.
Yeah, I guess I didn't see a specific Geddon page, but I know Stitch and Yui are in it. I think Stitch is possibly the leader of the cult, so he'd be a good person to talk to.
Cool. That's awesome. Yay.
Okay, well, we have a few minutes left. Are there any other questions?
Okay, so there is a page. There is a page for the death cult, but there's nothing on it. I'll send you guys the link.
Okay, great.
I found it on, looks like it is on the God Squad. It's linked to the God Squad unit page, is where it's linked from.
Cool.
Right there. Ta-da! So maybe we can talk to Stitch and have something put in there, because I agree that that's awesome. And there needs to be more kinds of RP, not just racial RP. I really love that idea as well.
Yeah, I went to one of their ceremonies last year, and it was chilling.
That's awesome.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I think y'all are probably tired of looking at the any questions. And kind of throw it back to our organizers. I see that we have about 5 minutes left, so I definitely want to leave enough time for folks to transition to the next class. But before I go, again, I want to thank everybody who came. I hope that this presentation was useful. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on Facebook or go ahead and jump on the Creatures of Beldag page on Facebook. There's a lot of really helpful folks there. There are, of course, some people who may sass you as well, but there's a lot of folks who really want to help you and grow RP in Belegarth. So, feel free. The water's fine. Come on, jump in. So thank you, everybody, for your time. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Quinn. I'm going to stop the recording. And in 4 minutes, we have the Peerage Council coming up. So stick around for that. I'm excited for it. I'm always excited for it. Every year I've been able to attend. They talk about really cool stuff and about how to be positive influences in the sport and be the changes that we need to see happen. So if you have something you want to talk about for that, you can contact Sorim and he will see if there's space on the schedule for you. You should contact him quickly though, because it's in 4 minutes. And yeah, exciting things.
Hi, Sir Anastasia. I can't hear you, but I can see your face.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.